You want it bigger, bolder, and built for nostalgia, so let's ride. Before you can say, draw, we're heading straight back into the 1950s, when westerns ruled the box office, when a single whistle over a quiet main street made your heart pound, and when one man's choice, made in front of the whole town, said more about courage than 100 speeches. If you grew up on Saturday matinees, drive-ins with tinny speakers, or late-night TV when the world was quiet, this one's for you. Saddle up. Because today we're taking a long, loving look at the top Western movies of the 1950s, why they mattered then, and why they still matter now, with the dust of the trail in your nose and the sun at your back. The 1950s were the golden saddle years of Hollywood. The West wasn't just a place on a map, it was an idea. It was space to breathe. It was second chances. It was the big, simple questions that never really are simple: right or wrong, stay or go, forgive or fight. Westerns weren't only entertainment, they were mirrors. People saw the world changing after the war, saw fear, hope, pride, and doubt, and they found a way to talk about it through the language of hats, horses, and quiet stares across dusty streets. The decade gave us heroes with flaws and villains with charm, towns that turned their backs, and drifters who did the right thing and then rode out because peace doesn't always include the man who made it. Let's start with the one that feels like a heartbeat. High Noon, 1952. Gary Cooper plays Marshal Will Kane, a man who wants to set his badge down and begin a new life with his new bride, played by Grace Kelly. The clock says noon. A train is coming. An outlaw is on board, and the town would rather look at their shoes than help. The story runs almost in real time, and every minute feels heavier than the last. Kane asks for help. Doors close. Friends turn away. The church debates and hesitates. The drumbeat of those minutes does something to you. You can almost hear the rails vibrating as the train draws near. This isn't just a showdown. It's a test. If doing the right thing costs you everything, do you still do it? Cooper's quiet, weathered face carries the whole weight. High Noon is often called a story about standing up when others won't, and that's why it still hits so hard. You don't need to be a marshal to know how it feels to be left alone with a hard choice, and to make it anyway. On a different side of the saddle sits Shane, 1953. Alan Ladd rides in like a ghost of the past, trying to be a better man than his gun will let him be. He helps a family, he plants hope, and then the threat of a ruthless cattle outfit forces him to strap on iron again. The heart of Shane is the boy, Joey, who sees the world in black and white until he learns how gray grows between. Kids saw a hero, adults saw a tragedy. Shane does the good thing, but he must leave so the good thing can live without the shadow of gun smoke. That last ride into the Blue Mountains while a child cries, "Come back, Shane," is one of the most famous endings in any movie because it's noble and sad at the same time. It says peace and violence don't share a house for long, and sometimes love means going away. Then there's The Searchers, 1956. A film that feels like heat on the horizon. John Wayne, so often the strong and straight hero, plays Ethan Edwards, a man driven by loss and hate, searching for his kidnapped niece across years and miles. The land is huge, the feelings are bigger. Ethan is brave, but he's also broken, and the film doesn't hide that. The story forces us to look at what anger does to a soul. The Monument Valley, sand towers like old gods, and the light makes every ridge look like a blade. By the time the door closes at the end, on Ethan standing outside, on the edge of a family he can't join, we understand that the West isn't only about who shoots faster, it's also about who can live with themselves when the shooting stops. Rio Bravo, 1959, came along like a grin after a storm. Some people call it an answer to High Noon, but it feels more like a compliment. John Wayne is Sheriff John T. Chance, a man who decides to hold the line with a small circle of friends instead of asking the town for help. Dean Martin plays a man battling the bottle. Ricky Nelson is young and quick. Angie Dickinson brings spark and steel. Walter Brennan croaks and jokes and keeps the kettle hot. The danger is real, but the friendship is the heart. You can feel the warmth in the pauses, in the teasing, in the music. Yes, they're singing, and it's lovely. Rio Bravo says something simple and strong. Sometimes you don't need a crowd. Sometimes you just need the right 3 or 4 who won't run. Broken Arrow, 1950, deserves a tip of the hat for trying to change the wind. James Stewart plays Tom Jeffords, who chooses to learn the language, share the smoke, and look across the line at the Apache as people, not just enemies. Hollywood in 1950 didn't always get it right, far from it, but Broken Arrow took a step toward respect. It showed dignity on both sides and said peace takes bravery too. Stewart's quiet sincerity sells the idea that the West was not only about conquering, it was also about understanding. While we're talking Stewart, Winchester 73, 1950, is a fine piece of storytelling built around a rifle that passes from hand to hand like a curse. Stewart isn't the soft-spoken neighbor here. He's a man with hurt in his eyes and a score to settle. The way the rifle ties strangers together makes the film feel like a ballad, verse after verse, each one different, all rhyming at the end. Stewart and director Anthony Mann teamed up for a string of films that made him leaner, meaner, and more complicated, and this one set the tone. The very shape of the 1950s Western, cleaner lines, harder choices, lives in it. 310 to Yuma, 1957, tightens the screws like a bank vault door. Van Heflin plays a good man who needs money for his ranch and takes on a dangerous job, escorting a charm-soaked outlaw, played with silky menace by Glenn Ford, to a prison-bound train. The outlaw pokes and prods, looking for the weak spots in the rancher's armor, fear for his family, fear of failing, fear of being forgotten. The showdown isn't about who's faster, it's about who's stronger inside. The clock, the train, the hotel room, everything traps the two men together until someone blinks, and when the rain comes and the wheels finally grind, you feel like you've run a mile in boots. Gunfight at the OK Corral, 1957, does what its title promises, but adds music, sweat, and charisma. Burt Lancaster's Wyatt Earp is stiff-backed and stubborn. Kirk Douglas's Doc Holliday smiles at death like it's an old friend he can't quite shake. Their uneasy friendship carries the movie, and when the dust flies on Tombstone Street, it's as much about who they are to each other as it is about who they face. You walk away humming the theme and thinking about how two very different men can hold each other up when the air turns sharp. The Naked Spur, 1953, is another Stewart man thunderhead. Stewart plays a bounty hunter dragging an outlaw toward a payday, but every mile gets messier. People change sides. Truth gets bent. The mountains look close enough to touch, and the story feels small and tight, like 5 people stuck in a room that keeps shrinking. By the end, you realize that good guy and bad guy are labels that don't help much when the chips are down. Vera Cruz, 1954, brings Gary Cooper and Burt Lancaster together and asks what happens when two very different men try to outsmile and outscheme each other during the Mexican Revolution. It's slick, fast, and funny until it turns sharp. Lancaster plays a charming rascal. Cooper is older, slower, and trying to keep a compass while cash and guns point the other way. It's a bridge between the noble westerns of the past and the rougher, greedier tales that would come later. Hondo, 1953, gives John Wayne a kind of quiet nobility. He's a scout who steps out of the desert and into a homestead where a mother and son need more than a hero. They need a decent man. Wayne handles the action, sure, but he also shows patience, gentleness, and respect. And that combination makes the film feel honest. It's tough without being cruel, tender without being soft. Big Country, 1958, spreads wide like a quilt. Big sky, big music, big feelings. Gregory Peck plays a sea captain who turns down the easy fight and refuses to prove himself with cheap bravado. There's a lesson packed inside all that panoramic beauty. Strength can look quiet, and refusing a duel can be braver than winning one. Burl Ives brings thunder as a rancher with a voice that could sand wood, and the movie ends up being about pride, peace, and what it means to be your own man when the crowd is shouting "Fight!" Johnny Guitar, 1954, is the strangest, bravest card in the deck. A Western built around Joan Crawford as a fierce saloon owner who won't bow to fear. It's full of color, full of passion, and full of women who make choices and pay for them. The film felt weird to some people when it came out, but time has been kind to it. If you want to see a Western that flips the script and still rides hard, this one's a high kick in blazing Technicolor. Randolph Scott and director Bud Boetticher made a handful of simple, perfect Westerns that cut right to the bone. 7 Men from Now, 1956, and The Tall T, 1957, are 2 of the best. Short, clean stories about men walking straight through danger because bending would break something inside them. These films don't waste a minute. They feel like a good knife, balanced, bright, and built to do one thing well. The Tin Star, 1957, brings Henry Fonda in as a weathered bounty hunter who teaches a young sheriff, played by Anthony Perkins, how to wear a badge without letting it own him. The lessons are simple. Keep your head, listen before you talk, don't show off, protect the weak even when it's not popular, but the movie makes them feel brand new. Watching it is like sitting on a porch with a steady uncle who says just enough and saves the rest. The Man from Laramie, 1955, might be the most intense of the Stewart Man pictures. Stewart rides into a town run by a cattle king and a reckless heir, and soon there are burned wagons, barbed wire, and rifles being sold to the wrong people. There's a scene so painful people still talk about it. Proof that the 1950s Western wasn't afraid to show violence that left a mark. Stewart's character is fueled by grief and principle, and the movie asks how much a man can lose and still stay himself. Bend of the River, 1952, and The Far Country, 1954, round out Stewart's great run. In Bend of the River, he leads settlers to a new home and faces betrayal from a friend. In The Far Country, he tries to stand clear of trouble in the Yukon until trouble won't stand clear of him. Both films are about how the West tests your word and how the line between survival and selfishness can be thin as a bootlace when greed enters the room. Day of the Outlaw, 1959, is winter on film. A snowbound town, a bitter rancher, a gang of men mean enough to break iron. The white land is quiet, but the quiet feels like a threat. Every hoof step sinks deep. Every look could start a fire. By the end, you realize that mercy in the cold might be the bravest thing of all. Ride Lonesome, 1959, returns to the Scott Boetticher groove. A bounty hunter, a dangerous trail, a woman in danger, and a young man who has to decide the kind of life he wants. It's spare and strong, like a fence post set in hard ground. You walk away thinking about how one act of grace can echo down the years. Warlock, 1959, looks at what happens when a town hires a savior. Richard Widmark, Henry Fonda, and Anthony Quinn swirl around issues of pride, power, and the cost of bringing order with a private hand. It asks a question as old as law itself. Does force bring peace, or does it only press trouble down until it explodes later? 40 Guns, 1957, thunders in with Barbara Stanwyck as a ranch boss who rides at the head of a long line of men like a moving storm. She is fierce, wounded, and proud. The camera charges and swings, the plot bucks and bolts, and you end up thinking about how power pulls on the heart and on the land. The Furies, 1950, gives Stanwyck another high saddle role, this time in a family feud over ranch and legacy. It's part Western, part Gothic, with love and money mixing like oil and water. The message is clear. In the West, a signature on a paper can be as deadly as a bullet. The Left-Handed Gun, 1958, hands Billy the Kid to a young Paul Newman, who plays him as a nervous spark in a dry field. It's a youth film in a cowboy hat, restless, angry, and searching for meaning in a world that keeps saying no. If you want to feel the wind of change that was blowing through America by the end of the decade, you can feel it right here. A Hanging Tree, 1959, brings Gary Cooper back as a doctor with secrets in a mining camp full of rumors. He fixes more than wounds. He tries to fix a broken community, and the town doesn't make it easy. The ending turns into a lesson about how one brave act can stop a mob and how a single steady voice can pull people back from doing something they can't undo. The Bravados, 1958, gives Gregory Peck a hard duty. Hunt the men who killed his wife and then face what revenge has done to his soul. Run of the Arrow, 1957, watches a Confederate soldier leave his old life and try to build a new one with the Sioux, raising questions about identity, loyalty, and the lines that divide us. The Big Sky, 1952, sails west by river, with the smell of wet wood and pine in the air and a sense of adventure that feels like the first day of summer. Together, these films round out a decade that tried almost every tone you can play on a fiddle. Noble, bitter, hopeful, angry, strange, and sweet. The magic of the 1950s Western isn't only in the stars or the stunts. It's in the balance between myth and truth. Studios stretched screens wide, CinemaScope, VistaVision, and filled them with red rock, green pines, white snow, and blue sky. You could feel the space. You could feel how small a rider looked against a cliff that had been there long before towns and would be there long after. The music mattered too. A trumpet line, a slow guitar, a whistle that told you one man was coming and he carried the future in his pocket. The best Westerns used simple choices to say big things. High Noon asks if you do the right thing when help doesn't come. Shane asks if you can put away the past so the next generation can live better. The Searchers warns that hate can chew a person hollow. Rio Bravo celebrates the strength found in friendship and recovery. 3:10 to Yuma asks whether a man can hold steady while a smooth voice whispers in his ear. Winchester 73 and the Naked Spur show that obsession costs more than the prize. Vera Cruz flashes a grin and says money talks, but it doesn't always say the truth. Johnny Guitar and 40 Guns shout that women carried the West too, and not just as background. They made choices, they paid the price, and they rode on. Behind the scenes, the 1950s Western changed the men and women who made them. John Wayne proved he could play warm, dark, funny, and fierce, sometimes in the same scene. James Stewart rebuilt himself into a hero with nerves under his smile. Gary Cooper aged like fine wood, fewer words, more meaning. Randolph Scott and Bud Boetticher carved a set of films so clean and strong that modern directors still study them. Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas showed that star power could be both a sword and a grin. And Barbara Stanwyck proved that a woman could run a ranch, a family, and a movie with one look and a level voice. Even as television boomed with Gunsmoke, Wagon Train, and Bonanza, the movie Western held the line by going deeper. If you want to feel the whole range across a weekend, try this. High Noon and Rio Bravo, back-to-back, to taste solitude versus fellowship. Then Shane and the Man from Laramie to see how grief and grace can share a frame. At The Searchers, when you're ready to stare into the dark. For pure starfire, light up Gunfight at the OK Corral. For a masterclass in clean storytelling, take a ride with 7 men from Now and the Tall T. For bold and off-center, tip your hat to Johnny Guitar and 40 Guns. For winter in your bones, Day of the Outlaw. For mercy on a hard trail, ride Lonesome. For pride and peace, measured under a giant sky, The Big Country. And if you want to watch a rifle tell a story, Winchester 73 still sings. If tonight you dust off one of these classics, settle into your chair, and let the West unfold again, you may find the same old magic waiting, steady as a campfire, warm as a cup of coffee poured from a blackened pot. The gun smoke may fade, the horses may grow quiet, but the legends of the 1950s Westerns will always ride. And as the credits roll, you might hear that far-off whistle, feel the sun at your back, And remember this, somewhere beyond your street, a rider lifts his hat, turns his horse, and chooses the next right thing. That choice made the Old West, and it still makes the world we live in today. This is Yesterday's. Thanks for watching.